Welcome to the Clarinet Ninja Podcast. My name is Jay Hassler. As always, bringing you the finest in clarinet information and entertainment. Playing us in today is Mr. Aaron Irwin, a wonderful, creative jazz musician and clarinetist. If you like what you hear, I'm going to leave some links down in the show notes in the description so that you can check out more of his work. Today on the podcast, we have Brad Behn. I got to know Brad Behn because he made the world's most revolutionary reed case. Then I tried his barrels. Woo, so good. His mouthpieces. Amazing. And then we became friends because I started going to the Clarinet Convention. And the Clarinet Convention is fun. If you're thinking about going to the Clarinet Convention, don't hesitate. Just do it. Get to meet a lot of people and some fine people. And Brad is one of the finest of the fine people. The first half of the conversation is here for you today. And it's a wide-ranging conversation about making stuff, playing the clarinet, the challenges when the world shut down, and the beauty of when the world shut down in a strange way. It's all here for you. And also, there's something waiting for you at clarinetninja.com. And that is an invitation to check out the Clarinet Ninja Dojo. That's where you get to spend some time with me every week learning the clarinet and videos that are made just for the dojo. What we're working on helps adult clarinet players find their unique path through learning the clarinet. And some people are making some really, really great progress, and I'd love for you to be one of them. So go ahead and check it out. There's 2 different levels of the dojo. One of them is right for you, I'm quite sure. And I'd love to see you there. So please go ahead, check it out, and email me. Sign up for an appointment, a 45-minute free appointment with me if you want to, on the Calendly link on the Ninja Dojo page. It's all down there in the description for you. But no further ado, please enjoy the first half of my conversation with Brad Behn. How are you?
You did better than me with the nice shirt thing.
Well,
I'm good.
Here's what I want to tell you. You actually helped correct one of the problems I didn't know I had in my life. When you said, I'm going to wear a nice shirt, I thought, then I said, I'm going to wear a nice shirt. You didn't really react, which is fine. But here's what it did. When I was in like 6th grade, my friends CB, Matt, Judd, Tim, and Sven would all call each other the night before school and say, let's wear ties tomorrow. And they never included me. And it hurt.
Oh, cool.
So, like the fact that we had an exchange about, hey, we're going to wear nice shirts, I felt very included, and it repaired a lot of the damage I was unaware of. And I think that's one of the things that, the clarinet really, in so many ways, brings us together and really helps us with lots of things we didn't even know were real problems. But I felt it. I felt it.
That is fantastic. I absolutely love that.
And by the way, I think your shirt is fantastic. I mean,
my father painted, where is it? He did that painting back there.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Was he a professional painter, or was that just something?
No, when he retired. But, the art was always part of my life. My grandfather was definitely a Renaissance man, a poet, a sculptor, an artist, a screenplay, a songwriter. And my father, just being surrounded by it, was always having art as an important part of his life. And when he retired, he then took on the joy of painting and learning, just basic stuff. He never really went beyond this kind of, I don't know what, I'm not an art historian to be able to describe the style, but it's abstract. It's not a literal interpretation of forms.
Well, but it's interesting. When I was talking to Ron Odrich a couple of years ago for a YouTube video,
yeah,
one of the things that he does everything. He's an amazing person. And it was the same kind of story as, my dad just did all this stuff. And then I thought that's what people do, basically. And it's interesting how that can really show up in our lives.
Well, it's interesting. When the pandemic hit, at that point, I was retired from being a college professor for a few years. And then I had a couple of private students, and I continued through the pandemic teaching them through Zoom. But, after a few years of doing that, one went off to college, and the other one, she was done with her experience, and we stopped. And then I don't have any students anymore. I've been focusing so much on the Mouthpiece business. So my Zoom experience is like 2 or 3 times a year, and I'm just not in my headspace with it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I still remain on Zoom multiple hours a week. at least 3 hours a week, usually more. But it's still funny because like every once in a while, something that came really naturally to me in the pandemic, click, 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 boom, boom, boom. Like every once in a while, I've got to stop and think about it because also the program updates and things aren't in the same place all the time.
Yeah.
So that's the thing.
Tom Kowalski, he always jokes, Zoom, they keep on doing updates and it never gets better.
Well, but here's what's funny to me is I didn't know technology like this. I knew like Skype existed, but I didn't really ever use it. I never really thought that this would become such a central part of my life. And it reminds me of that old Louis C.K. bit where he's in an airplane. He's pretending he's in an airplane. He's like, my cell phone won't work. And then his bit on the whole thing is, you're flying through the air, thousands of miles high, and you're upset. This is a miracle. And you're upset that your cell phone won't work. And I feel like, Zoom works really, really well considering, it's kind of amazing.
It's a good point. On that airplane thing, I remember I had this mouthpiece case that a friend of mine made. This is years ago. And he made this beautiful mouthpiece box out of maple wood, flaming maple. It's just the texture was just beautiful. And Eddie Daniels I was doing in the orchestra. He was the guest artist and I was showing it to him. So I just love that. And he said, and then he got in this this kvetching kind of,
right.
And he said, yeah, but will it protect the mouthpiece? And I said, of course, it's got padding here. And he says, yeah, but I want to be able to jump out of an airplane and have the parachute not be open and not break my tip. I said, well, if your tip doesn't break, you consider it a victory.
Yeah, those are some very, very seriously high expectations of a product.
He might be dead, but his mouthpieces are okay.
Right. Yeah, they'll live in perpetuity. I'm curious, during the pandemic, what was the mouthpiece business like during the pandemic? Did you sell more mouthpieces because people were at home playing and you were sending them out, or did your business slow down?
No, it actually boomed. The pandemic did two things. One, you remember, everybody came in and we had this community, all these different communities. You could find many different sorts, whether you wanted to look for politics or if you wanted to talk about clarinet. You remember Andy Simon did those clarinet licorice talks or whatever, where he had his various people and so many different really interesting things were going on where we were started to share. And so I did some Facebook, just videos showing my mouthpieces and what I was up to. So that was very helpful for business. And I did my read tutorials on Facebook. That was, just got people focusing on Behn. Hey, who is this guy? And then also I was able to focus on the business more because, usually I'm doing so many different things. The business is a big thing, the orchestra. And before that, I was also busy with teaching that I could only give each endeavor, half time. I had 3 or 4 full-time jobs and I was able to give them all half-time push. And so I was no longer neglecting it. I was giving it 150% of my energy and exploring new designs and all of these different things. And in the end, the sum of all of those actions, I think the business grew. I'm still enjoying the rewards from that time. The pandemic was very good to us. And we didn't shut down. I mean, in the coasts, the cities shut down. People couldn't go to work. I had 2 guys that were coming in full time every day working, and we all wore masks and we made mouthpieces.
Well, I feel like that environment is conducive to staying functional in the midst of a pandemic because you can space yourself out. You don't have to be on top of each other, and also the sphere of people you're seeing is really, really small. I mean, that was pretty much the whole thing. It was like limit the number of people you see to limit your potential exposure, and it seems like that would work really, really well in that context.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it was wonderful. There was no traffic. You're driving along and you go to the shop and it was quiet. It was kind of a peaceful, time to be inward. Amelia was a very young little girl at the time, right?
Yeah, so she was more 20.
Focus on her.
Yeah, she was like 2.5 when the pandemic started. Yeah. And
how lucky she was for the pandemic in a weird way, right?
Well, she didn't miss much, right? I mean, she got to go to kindergarten on time and all that. And I mean, the pandemic had a really up and down thing for me after all is said and done. Because, I've my online program and the teaching online and the stuff that's happening with adult learners in my program is unbelievable to me. Like every once in a while I stop and I think, my God, I started this thing and I really think it's amazing. Like and the people that are in it are working really, really hard. They're getting a lot of stuff out of it. So that would have never happened without the pandemic because I could send emails and that was about all I could do with the computer. So I had to learn a lot of stuff, and I learned that I like filming videos. I learned that I like audio equipment. I learned that I like doing all this stuff, but I never would have done any of it if the pandemic didn't happen. But then on the flip side, I was married when the pandemic started, and now I'm not. And I, there was of course a lot of factors that go into that, but that certainly was a stress.
Yeah.
In all of it. And I wasn't the one that chose not to be married. So that was hard. But my life now, is because of the pandemic in a strange way really kind of turned itself around where I'm doing a lot of different things. One of the things I learned was that I love performing music, but I'm also okay not doing that as much, which I didn't know, right? I mean, I had no idea that I would still be me and I would be okay if I wasn't playing in front of people all the time. Mm-hmm. I mean, so now I work a couple weekends a month and do a lot more teaching, both in my full-time job at a middle school and online, and my life is balanced a lot better. And freelancing is no joke. It's a really hard thing to do, and it's a very insecure life. So there's so much of what I'm doing now. I would have never chosen it for myself, but I love it. Okay, it's a much better choice, and I didn't feel like I made a choice. It kind of happened to me, but I think that's. I mean, you tell me if this is true. I feel like a lot of what happens in our life is kind of what you make of whatever happened to you and how you find a way to fit into it and be yourself. And
well, that's the first thought that I had when you were describing, what an unbelievable turmoil and upheaval in life just the pandemic was.
Right.
Add to that, you've got a baby, like a young toddler, and you've got a marriage which goes from here to here. And you're you're learning and uncovering new things about yourself. And you're like you are a winner, man, to be able to come through all of that on the upside. There are a lot of people that would have beaten them down. And, here we are able to laugh together just a few years down the road. That's amazing.
Well, thank you for saying such nice things. It's funny, now the thing that is an issue for me is how, and I think it's kind of what you were saying, is there's so much to do. There's just so much to do now that I've created this thing that I love more than performing music is, this online program that I'm doing. I love it so much. There's so much stuff I want to do. I can't really ever stop working.
Yeah.
And I love it, but there are times I would like to just sit and not feel like I should be doing something else.
Right.
But well, I'm curious in terms of your ecosystem with all the different products you make. And so I'm just going to call them out right now. Reed cases, mouthpieces and barrels,
hey,
bells, reeds. Could you just basically work all the time? I feel like you could just make stuff 24 hours a day, and probably that would be the right amount of time for you to work.
I kind of, yeah, I could. And I kind of do. I sleep. I'm a good sleeper, so that's very fortunate. I'll go to bed at 10:30 and I'll wake up at 7:30 and I'm, and just repeat.
Right.
But because we love what we do, we have the energy to do a lot of it and not feel broken down or beaten down. And because there's so many different facets to what we do, if I get after an hour and a half or 2 hours on the bench where I'm working on a mouthpiece, I can step into another nook and fill a couple of orders that came in, and then I can go have a snack, and then I can go and do another thing on the mouthpieces, and then I can I was thinking, if I just did this little tweak on the mouthpiece that I'm working on, well, maybe that's a cool idea we should incorporate in the next design that we do. Take a note, and then I talk to my engineer, and we powwow on that, and then I'll go down to the factory, and I'll check on how production is going there. It's like there's always something to do, and there's this new thing to do, which keeps it interesting.
Well, I'm curious to know about this. Sometimes when I think about Behn and him designing his fingering system, how many times he had to make something, drill a hole in it, and then have it not work out like he wanted, and then have to start all over again. And I'm curious to know, when you are working on mouthpieces and you're working on a new design, there must be many iterations of that before you actually figure it out. And I'm curious to know about that, but also about sort of the emotional impact on you. Like, do you feel frustrated? Like, oh, I thought this was it, and and then you got to start over again. Tell me about that.
Yeah, for sure. I'm reminded there's a Fred Flintstones episode. I don't know if our younger generation watches that show anymore, but he and his neighbor Barney, they were working on some kind of a concoction in the garage, a soft drink, and remember 7 times, 8 times, 11 up or whatever. They keep on reinventing it, and the number was associated to the invention that was finally a success. For me, the equivalent experience was recently we were working on an E-flat clarinet mouthpiece. And years ago, I was working with a CNC machine shop that was not my own, and they were making, on my designs, they were making my mouthpiece blanks for me, and then I would hand finish them. And so I had a batch of partially made E-flat clarinet mouthpieces, just the body and the tenon was cut and the bore was cut. And so I had some limitations. I was by the confines of the pre-existing shape. So I had a bore that was already a predetermined length, and I have a body that was, so I could make a chamber that was so long. But I wanted it to be different than my last design because time moves forward and I'm looking for something a little slightly different voice over the experience. And so to make the sound a little bit darker, deepen the baffle, but if you deepen the baffle, the chamber gets bigger, the total volume gets larger, the total intonation drops. And I couldn't go too low, so I was making the bore a little bit smaller to value out the intonation. But then a weird thing starts to happen. When the bore gets smaller, it changes the intonation in the upper left hand. It can drop, which is cool. On a lot of E-flat clarinets, the intonation in the upper left hand is sharp.
Right.
But I went too far. Right. And so why is my B 20 cents flat? Who knew on the E-flat clarinet that could be the case? Well, from this, got to redo it, redesign it, cut another one and try again. And we were doing this in a 3D printing side of things. So the prototyping process was relatively fast and relatively inexpensive. We weren't consuming our expensive hard rubber to do it. We went through about a dozen, maybe 8 iterations until we found the formula. And the good thing is, because of all of these failures, we learned a lot. I mean, I highly recommend failing in life. There's no better way to learn. Get a D in philosophy, man. Yeah! Be a middle of the road student, because then you've got something to strive for. I mean, if we're always nailing it all the time, then we don't really have a perspective on life. Chuck Schumer got a perfect score on his SAT. Did you know that? I didn't know that.
Well, I just learned it from you. If you didn't know it, how do I know?
I mean, there are people out there who are really bright.
Right.
But, they've got their own, set of problems in life too. So, I'm not saying anything about him, but it just was a thing that popped in my mind. I would have loved to have gotten a perfect score on my SAT, but I didn't. And I think that I'm a lot intellectually diverse as a result of me being an average student. I had to strive, to fight, to scramble to solve the problems, and I learned a lot along the way. So yeah, it's a mixed bag, and how we struggle, what we do to get to the top, like you did through the pandemic, and I did with that E-flat clarinet mouthpiece. I think can help define who we become.
Well, so much of it for me comes down to me hearing what I say to my daughter and realizing how right I am, and that I should take some of that advice sometimes. Like I was telling her the other day, and she's 7, so this is too much for her a little bit. Yeah. But I try and plant ideas so that, because I tell her, a lot of this stuff I didn't learn until I was in my 40s. I want you to have a head start. And one of the things I was telling her, is it's not going to work if you wake up every day and think it's going to be a perfect day. And if something goes wrong, you're disappointed. Something's going to go wrong every day. And it's just a matter of recognizing it, doing what you can to fix it, recognizing if you can't fix it, and making the right moves from that point. But dismiss the part about being disappointed. It didn't go like you wanted it to. Because some part of every day is going to be like that. And that's it. And it's not even a negative thing, but it's how you respond to it, how you take it in and change things. And Like it's so much of all of this. I feel like after, to play the clarinet, like, let's say it like we do, like you had to spend so many hours in a room by yourself. It's not like anyone, can just play the clarinet or any instrument, but since we're talking about clarinet, like things have to go wrong. There's too many things. And then even after you practice and practice and practice and practice, how many times have any of us had a perfect performance? And if we thought we did, when we hear a recording of it, it's nowhere near what we thought it was. It's so, this whole idea of it not working out right is baked into learning a musical instrument. And I feel like that's something that is like when I see, middle school kids struggle with the frustration of not being able to repeat something that they can do sometimes. Like I really recognize they don't, particularly kids today, on all the swiping and all the things and the computers, the mechanics of things and their fine motor skills are much different than when you and I were kids. And we built things. We had toys with screws in them that we would screw in. Mm-hmm. Kids don't do that anymore. And it's very interesting to see how it goes and to see what they're learning, their learning system or, like how it is they take the information in and make it repeatable in some way. It's a very interesting thing to see because so much of it is a really stripped down version of all the challenges I have, right? It's so clear. And then I realize, I've got that same thing. And so a lot of what I have gotten, particularly in the last 7 years since having a kiddo, is really learning from what I think is important enough to say. And that's been a really interesting thing for me. You were talking about your expensive, hard rubber. And I've already heard you talk about it, but I love to hear you talk about it. So will you tell us about, because I think that's a thing that is really, it is absolutely unique to you, right? That you make your own rubber and you make your own blank and then you go from there. Tell me if I'm wrong. I don't know any other mouthpiece maker that does that.
Well, I think there are some mouthpiece makers who claim to do it, and I can't say with certainty whether or not they do it, but I can say that there's rubber and then there's rubber and, the materials and, leave the market to decide. But ultimately I'm very proud that we manage everything from concept to completion. We make our hard rubber. We make our designs and we prototype them in-house in our U.S. factory and down the road from where we live. And everything else in between. Yes, there are mouthpieces. Basically when you look at a mouthpiece, it's a mouthpiece. There's little, to an untrained eye that's different about it. So what makes me different is we're in control of the material and, no one else has it. We also, I will add, I do have a mouthpiece patented design that no one else has access to. And we're also, I think, we add a lot of creative ideas to the mouthpiece design, with the baffle contours and the chamber lengths versus bore lengths and, bore shapes and such. All of those designs that, options that we have been, I think, more completely thought through and are more varied in their choices. I mean, I'm sometimes surprised. I don't want to be seeming critical, but I'm sometimes quite surprised when I look at the saxophone side of the the single reed equation. Right. They have a lot more creativity. They've got round chambers and square chambers and, step baffles and, deep chambers and, where the chamber is larger than the bore. And, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many different things and so many different styles and sounds. There could be a guy who plays, in a Billy Joel style rock, music and then, somebody playing classical alto saxophone. Those two instruments hardly sound like the same instrument, yet they are. It's the saxophone, the alto saxophone. So the clarinet is a much smaller playing ground of acceptable sounds and styles to I think an unfortunate degree. We can go outside of our American sensibilities and think about what's going on in Turkey or Greece or Balkans and really stretch our ears, but it's not just in our own home turf, nearly as wide of a spectrum of sounds as on the saxophone side of things. So the clarinet designers and makers of mouthpieces really haven't needed to stretch their brains. And I find it really fun. And I find it, sure, again, some of those ideas that we've explored have not been successes, and others have been really profound for us. And we've baked a lot of those the results of that learning process into our mainstream mouthpiece models. I can't remember if I even remotely answered your question, which I can't. The rubber, yeah.
Yeah, you didn't answer that question. I'll ask it again later. But in hearing you talk about it, the thing is that it's interesting to me is that I got a good friend named Evan Christopher. I don't know if you're familiar with his playing. He's a New Orleans jazz clarinet player, and he plays on an Albert system, a completely different sound than I make. And I'm thinking about that idea of someone playing, rock and roll saxophone versus classical saxophone, how different the sound is. And I feel like there is that range. And when he talks about it, he talks about that music basically being like an ethnic folk music. Like you're talking about the music in Turkey or Greece. And there is something about that type of playing that doesn't lend itself to getting hyper excited about equipment. Because I feel like so many of so many people that came out of the New Orleans tradition, they'd be doing parades with their instruments, right? That they would leave the case at the end of the parade and then drive back to the beginning of the parade and with their instrument out of the case and then play it in the parade and then put it back in the case at the end, which I would never do that with my instrument. There's so many different things that made it so that they couldn't really get that particular with the equipment. They were using whatever was there and whatever worked at the time. And I feel like, when I talk to Evan, he's particular about his mouthpiece, but I just don't think there's probably much of a market for it from a business standpoint. There's far less people playing New Orleans jazz than there is rock and roll saxophone or classical saxophone. There's a lot more people in that. And I also think, tell me what you think about this. I feel like saxophone is an instrument that gets played recreationally much more than the clarinet, which I think accounts for a lot of that, because there's lots of different places and styles to play and ways to do it without an institution. Like if you're going to play orchestral clarinet, you need an orchestra, and that requires a lot of people and not very many clarinet players. So, but if you're playing in bar bands, there's bar bands everywhere, and people are not showing up or can't do it, or so there's lots of opportunities, and I don't think we have that sort of way in to playing the clarinet as much. That's actually one of the things that I am always interested with my students to talk about. Okay, what do you want to do with the clarinet? Where do you want to play this? Where are you playing it now? What are you looking for in terms of a goal? Because it is a smaller segment of things than somebody who can play in a jazz band or a bar band or wants to play in a community band or at a church, or there's lots of things with the saxophone. And there's just a few less of those things with the clarinet. So I never thought about it from the standpoint of somebody conceiving of making mouthpieces for different uses, right? Which is why I said to talk to you. But so about this rubber, you start with what?
To make the rubber?
Yeah.
So the hard rubber is a combination of different ingredients. The essential ingredients are hard rubber, natural latex from the rubber tree,
right,
and sulfur. And Charles Goodyear accidentally invented it. He was an inventor, and he was trying to find a way to become wealthy. He was struggling with different ideas, and he had a contract with the post office where he was making the bags, I think burlap bags that they carried the mail in, so that they're waterproof. And, cause, if the mail would get destroyed if it gets wet, all those letters written with those fountain, the quill pens and what have you, would just bleed and turn into a big inky mess. So, he made a lot of money with this contract by impregnating, rubber latex into the texture of the fabric. And the problem was that in the winter, the bag would become completely inflexible. It would just freeze into a big mess. And in the summer, it would become gooey and sticky and melty in the hot weather. and he got in big trouble for his, contract not fulfilling the requirements of their needs. So, he almost went to jail, but he was experimenting with how can he make this material stable. And, he was, in his kitchen stirring, ingredients with the latex rubber to try to make it, less volatile from different temperatures. But it was in the kitchen. So the stove, back then they'd have the stove. It was always on, fire underneath, and it was always just simmering with heat. So he spilled some of this gooey material that he was mixing, rubber and sulfur, on the stove top, and it vulcanized right then and there. It cooked. And then he discovered that material became stable. It didn't change due to, after it cooled down and was vulcanized fully. He discovered that it was good to go. So more experimentation, and he became, saved by his accidental discovery. Most inventions are, many inventions anywhere, by accident. And that was the beginning of, the new plastics revolution of that was the end of the 1800s, the end of the 19th century, and into the late 19th century and early 20th century, the world's industry embraced this new hard rubber plastic material and invested a great deal of research. Laboratories became dedicated to it to try to learn more about it. Excuse me. And so then over time, labs and manufacturing facilities started exploring with additives, accelerants, so it could cure quicker, stabilizers, so it wouldn't be so volatile and change its form during the cooking process. Over the course of time, the sound of mouthpieces from those early days, the hard rubber that was made, became less attractive to my opinioned ears and many others. Nowadays, people don't really think about it, I think, as much as they should, but basically the rubber, as those accelerants and additive stabilizers entered the fray, the sound became duller and less, with less, fewer overtones and less color, and it became more boring, of a sound. And, so our rubber, without getting into the trade secret side of things, is absent those accelerants and additives. It's a very pure essential ingredients combination. And as a result, we have to make the hard rubber rods because they are not as consistent and perfect in form from batch to batch because it's quite volatile. It's not very stable during the cooking process because it's absent those stabilizers, but it has a better sound. And that's ultimately what I'm looking for. So one of the reasons why my mouthpieces are expensive, yes, I admit it, I know the yes there, is because there's a lot of waste. I go through the expensive process of making a rubber rod, and then I might realize, okay, I have to cut off half of the end because it's full of checks and voids and defective. Sometimes I make the mouthpiece. I don't even discover that there was a problem in that rubber until I actually made a mouthpiece, go through the whole process, and I realize that mouthpiece has to go in the bin. But it's worth it because it sounds better. What is the difference, somebody might say? Well, I sort of already expressed it. I'll try to do it more succinctly. There are more partials, more overtones in the sound. There are highs, there are mediums, and there are lows that are just packed into the construct of the tonal, the sound, that are more so than in modern rubber from Germany and where have you. Those materials produce a dark quality of sound by their absence of upper partials. And I think of a good dark sound as being one that has all of the partials, but it's just EQ'd such that it's a pleasing balance. And that's what I think my rubber and my craft in combination can do. Typically, when somebody plays my mouthpieces, they're like, wow, there's a lot of, coming from whatever they've been on. There's a lot of sound. There's a lot more of that stuff that gets me excited. Some people who are really interested in a very dark sound, they play my mouthpiece and they think, "Oh, there's too many highs. I don't know what to make of it, and it's not for me." But for the most part, I think people really welcome the combination, the addition of newfound harmonics in their sound. They just have to learn how to, make use of it in an artistic way and to control it and navigate the new worlds that can be explored. And usually, it might take, when somebody comes from a regular mouthpiece to one of my premium mouthpieces, it might take a 2-year exploration where until they've sort of fully figured it out. But I think it's usually a very pleasant one. They don't complain that it's just a joyous, new things are discovered every week.
Okay, I've got a few things in my head. I want to get back to clarinet mouthpieces in a second. I still believe something you told me isn't true, and I want to express it again and have you respond to it again, because I'm going to still believe it's true. And that is that, like the old Meyer mouthpieces that everybody wants on the alto, that the rubber on those mouthpieces, whatever fumes were coming out of the rubber when they made the blanks, was toxic, and it was killing people in that volatile state. And that's why we cannot have those same blanks that they made the Meyer mouthpieces out of in the 50s. That's totally, that's true, right?
I don't think so.
I know you don't think so.
I think that there's a great lore and legend. I was led to believe back when I was in college, similar types of stories that the industry had to move to different. I think that industries there are more regulations, right? And so the byproduct of a more regulatory world, that certainly Germany, where modern rubber is typically sourced, is one of, it's part of the EU. It's a highly regulated world that they live in. And Germany is one of the more regulated countries within. So there's that. And, America is far more regulated now than it was at the end of the 19th century. Wow, was it the Wild West back then? And we're doing less destructive things to our environment. But I don't think it's a direct one-to-one relationship that some guy in the factory that was making the hard rubber that the Meyer mouthpieces were made from broke. So, people can die around toxic things. And a lot of the stuff that we experience in life, they were toxic in their manufacturing process, like that styrofoam cup you drink at the Fenway Park when you're enjoying a hot beverage, or although styrofoam is probably not a good thing for us to be, drinking out of because it's not good for the environment, but so on and so forth. The glass windows that I'm looking out, those, when they were making the glass, you probably, are standing amongst materials that are not good for you. So, but when it's finished, it becomes totally safe. Like if you've got a retainer in your mouth that's made out of plastic, right, and that the material, the resin formula for the plastic in its pre-cooked, pre-finished state, you don't want that in your mouth. Right. But when it's, it's inert. So I think that I might have taken your statement too literal. People die when they're producing stuff all the time, but the end user doesn't. Right.
Well, that's how I understood it, right? That it was in that form. It was making people sick, maybe not like immediately sick, but like it was doing something.
Yeah.
And whether,
can I just add, yeah. I spoke with the rubber scientist at the lab that helped me ultimately reproduce the old rubber from the mouthpiece that we reverse engineered. And I asked him, because, these things were in my brain too. And I want to make sure I'm not killing my customers. I need them to be alive. I want them to keep coming back.
Right.
And so he said, you'd have to drink the pre-vulcanized material like milk if you wanted to kill you.
Well, but let me just say, I've never heard anyone say, when I talk to the rubber scientist, you're the first person I've ever heard utter those words in that order. It's awesome. So getting back to a couple minutes ago in the conversation, I've taken in so much of your equipment in the past couple years. Like, obviously, we can talk about the recases more, but these are life-changing. Absolutely the biggest difference maker I've ever experienced in the clarinet equipment world. But then when I changed to the barrels, both of these situations, I mean, this is different because it's not actively making the sound. The barrel was like, boom, better, done, no adjustment period, just like improvement, done. The mouthpiece I've been playing since we were in Ireland, and it's the only mouthpiece I've played since we were in Ireland, and immediately I like it better, full stop, but I can grow into it more. Like I feel like there's a way in which I'm still adjusting to playing it. That it's like a different curve in terms of what role it's playing in my sound production. There was some time when it was much harder for me to control my altissimo notes. They came out easier, which was the problem because then the things I was doing previously just way too much, right? So there was some details in my voicing and how I was playing that I've come to have to learn how to play a little bit differently. But I would imagine, here's the thing for me, so I've got to play a little bit differently. I think in this particular situation, I've got to learn how to play a little bit better, right? These sort of big things I was able to do and sort of force out of I don't want to say what mouthpiece it was, but out of a different mouthpiece. Now I don't have to do those things, which I probably shouldn't have been doing in the first place, right? So it's interesting for me when I look at my relationship to equipment, what it's doing to my playing, what it requires of me as a player, and how there's times when the equipment is asking me to do something I shouldn't do, or it's actually insisting that I play the clarinet well. And there's a huge benefit to playing it well. That all of a sudden opens up other things. And, I always talk with my students about how one component of our playing can't change without impacting all sorts of other components of our playing. And this mouthpiece has been interesting for me because I've become a better player in ways that are completely separate from the altissimo thing. It wasn't like a huge change, but it was a nuanced change that also, put my tongue in a place that was more similar between slurring and tonguing, right? It created less motion in my mouth, which is a great thing. It opened up very positive outcomes in situations that I maybe wouldn't have stumbled upon if I weren't playing that equipment. It's interesting because I'm still, like you were saying earlier, I'm still learning how to get stuff out of this because there's so much stuff in it to get. And a lot of it has to do with the thin rails versus the thick rails that I was playing on. I could push really hard on the thick rails in a way that probably wasn't the best clarinet playing. It wasn't, I actually wouldn't say I was playing the clarinet wrong or in a way that was inappropriate, but it allowed me to do something that had an impact on everything else. And removing that opens up different results from the same actions, or new actions get different results. It changes the game in a lot of different ways. And it's interesting to see how that unfolds because it's not like it's just one thing. Everything starts to shift. And it's very exciting because all of a sudden this equipment change can actually change how you sound, right? Because what normally happens for me is I'll switch to a mouthpiece and then sound the same 3 or 4 weeks later. And then I'll sound ultimately the same a year later, exactly the same as if nothing's happened. My experience is a little bit different in doing it, but I have all the same problems and the same challenges. And the thing that I found is that I actually sound different. And like my concept, I've been able to change my concept of sound. And again, we're not talking huge, but in small ways that are super meaningful to me. I always use this as my mom wouldn't be able to tell the difference. She's lovely, and I love her. She loves me, but she can't tell the difference between the mouthpieces because she doesn't play the clarinet. But for those of us that play the clarinet, that change is really meaningful and really powerful. And I really like playing the clarinet. I like, that's just a true statement, but I like playing the clarinet with this mouthpiece and this barrel. It's been a real eye opener to me. And I was thinking today as I was existing in the world for a second that I can't believe I never played. Like there was a large part, the majority of my career, I wasn't playing on this. It kind of made me mad. I wish that I'd been playing on this a long time ago. And, obviously a lot of it didn't exist a long time ago, so that's your fault. But in terms of what it means to me to have this experience and have it really sort of reignite some things and allow my ears to take me a different place than they went before. So it's all been very, very exciting. And, it's frustrating to me that I didn't know you until about 2 years ago.
Well, I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to meet 2 years ago, and looking forward to the next 20 years, however many. And so thanks for sharing your observations. It means so much to me to hear that. And I mean, subtlety is the kind of world that we live in. So even if your mom might not understand, but maybe because you're happier with what you're producing, it's helping you explore a musical phrase in a way that is more, fulfilling and more from the heart. It's helping inspire you to weave an interesting, expressive note. And so your mom might not be able to put it in words, but she might hear you and be more touched by what you're doing. It may not have something to do with the timbre. I make a sound. Well, it's more than that. I'm making art. And, the joke is, if I put a different reed on or a different barrel or a different mouthpiece on, I'll ask my colleague in the art chair, well, what do you think? And she'll say, well, it sounds like a clarinet, like to the little old lady in the audience. It's a clarinet is a clarinet. But to us, it's so much more. And, ultimately, I love the relationship side of the equipment. If you honestly are having a relationship with your equipment, you're going to be more expressive, a better musician. And I have a relationship with my reeds and with my mouthpiece and my clarinet. I mean, because it's so much part of me.
The first half of my conversation with Brad Behn. I hope you enjoyed it. Please keep a lookout for the second half of the conversation. While you're doing that, go ahead and leave a 5-star rating and a review. Would you check out the Clarinet Ninja Dojo? Look at all the things that I have that I'm excited to put in the world and engage with you about the clarinet. The clarinet is a wonderful thing. It brings people together like it brought Brad and I together. And I've got a good friend who knows a lot about the clarinet and making stuff, and I feel very lucky. All right, we'll see you next time on the Clarinet Ninja Podcast.